Welcome congregants and guests to Temple Rodef Shalom. We're so excited to have you all here. Whoops. I live with this. Today's programming is being recorded. I'm Ellen Morgenstern. I'm co-chair of the Adult Education Committee, which is co-sponsoring today's program with the Caring Committee, led by Stephanie Bloom. Although it is difficult to compete with the NFL on a Sunday in January...
Sorry, that just came out.
Will someone please remove this lady from the sanctuary? We are glad you chose us over Tampa Bay, the New York Jets, the Baltimore Ravens, and later today, the Washington Commanders. Thank you for coming out. Today's program is in honor of the life and memory of Karen O'Kaplan. And every time I say Karen O'Kaplan, I think that she must have had Irish ancestors. The North Star of the Adult Education Committee for so many years. She brought her intellectual gifts, matched by her tenacious, resilient spirit, to build a lifelong learning program that resides in the Adult Education Committee at TRS. A special welcome to Karen Kaplan's family. Her husband, Marshall, in the front row right here. Marshall, you want to raise your hand? Great. Son, Andrew, and her beloved grandchildren, Cole and Lane. We're so glad you're here. We know your loss last February remains raw and deep. Today, Cole and Lane, you will hear quite a bit about your Nana and what she meant to so many of us at this temple. We hope you will remember what you hear and store it away so that she will always be with you. Our topic today was selected because it was her trademark characteristic. It is so great to start the year together talking about a subject that has universal appeal. Resilience. You can't buy it. You can't lease it. You can't even borrow it. It is, as Rabbi Amy recently said, resilience lives in all of us. Think of it as your superpower. As Jews, we have experienced extensive trauma, even catastrophe, and we have survived as a people and as a civilization. We have had to heal from trauma, to recover and regenerate and reseed vital Jewish life over and over again. We have found ways to cultivate resilience, both individually and collectively. So our goal today is to help you harness the amazing superpower of resilience. New York Times columnist Jane Brody, now retired, wrote a column on this very topic just about a year ago. If you'll permit me, I'd like to just read a little bit about it. She said, quote, "Many people I know are waiting patiently or otherwise for life to return to normal. We are eager for the day when we can again live without fear of a deadly virus that lurks like a stalker, disrupting social and cultural events, travel, education, and life's milestones that once missed can never be retrieved. And many people remain crippled by despair over the death of loved ones, as well as lost jobs, businesses, housing, income, and even sleep. How so many of us wonder, are we supposed to cope with so many obstacles blocking our way forward? One way is to call upon the age-old characteristic that enables us to weather adversity, resilience. During this program, our wonderful speaker, Dr. Betsy Stone, will indicate when she would like you to ask questions. We encourage you to do so. We have two, do we have two mics? I thought we had two mics. Okay, oh, there we go. There's two mics. Please step up, be brief, because we want to give everybody the opportunity to speak. It's my personal pleasure to introduce one of Karen's dearest friends, Tina Nauheim, who will briefly talk about her through the lens of their 4-decade personal friendship. According to Tina, resilience should have been Karen's middle name. Tina?
Hello, everybody. Some of you haven't had the privilege of knowing Karen Orloff Kaplan, so I will humbly attempt to introduce you to my beloved friend of 45 years. And I'm just one friend. She had many. I'm just the lucky one who's here today. She was the proverbial woman of valor that we read about in Proverbs. Strong, righteous, a nurturer, and a warrior. She fought not only for her personal world and those she loved, but also for the world around her. She left a meaningful legacy with a hallmark of continued resilience. As in most exemplary lives, both personal and professional, Karen met with adversity along with many successes. No matter the nature of the obstacle, Karen bounced back better and stronger. She seemed almost invincible, reinventing herself with increased energy and resolve, and loads of resilience. Karen's distinguished career was in healthcare policy, both in the public and private sector. She impacted so many in the areas of cancer prevention, advocacy, palliative care, and end-of-life decisions. She had a brilliant mind, a huge heart, and a very persuasive manner. Her incredible leadership style encompassed advocacy, stewardship, and mentorship, but building personal relationships was always at her core. As her professional life slowed down, these qualities simply translated to a new career of volunteerism as Karen became committed to community engagement at Temple Road of Shalom. In her inimitable, resilient style, she dove into a reinvented version of herself, and these well-honed leadership skills served her and us so well. Hence, the evolving success of the Adult Education Committee. Karen always found the bandwidth to create and initiate the next big thing. Let's just say that these leadership superpowers started with her investing in caring one-on-one relationships. She made you feel like the most important person in the room. Her charm and her warmth enveloped her persuasiveness. So if your arm got twisted, it was happily accepted by those of us in awe of it. Try turning her down, nearly impossible. But always she was collaborative. She showed confidence in you, and perhaps more than you had in yourself. She wanted you to succeed, and she never micromanaged. This was a great gift. Karen had a platform that became her signature, inviting you for coffee at Starnut Cafe in McLean in the back room. Many people in this room know what I'm talking about. But Karen's crowning glory was her family, her beloved sons, Ian and Andrew, grandchildren, Cole and Lane, her beloved husband, Marshall, and the Berman clan, Jessica, Richard, and granddaughters, Shoshana and Aviva. She spread love to lifelong family and friends. She was a role model, teaching inspiring, and never giving up. She exemplified resilience. Her untimely death last February was a shock. This time she didn't bounce back. But Karen's valiant legacy lives on in many places, but especially in her spiritual home, Road of Shalom, which she loves so much. And now I would like to introduce Karen's beloved spiritual leader and ours, Rabbi Amy Schwartzman.
Thank you, Tina, for your beautiful few words about me and your extensive portrait of the wonderful, amazing Karen Kaplan. Thank you to you, Ellen and Carol, to Cantor Allen Leader, and to Stephanie Bloom, who has helped also to create this program, our caring community, our adult ed community, the Kaplan family, together, many energies coming into one place so that we can hear and learn from the speaker whom I have the honor of introducing in a few moments, Dr. Betsy Stone. To just add a few words to Tina's wonderful remarks about Karen. Karen and I met in my very first, not just year, but month that I arrived at Temple Road Shalom, which, by the way, was July of 1990. That's over 32 years ago. Can you believe it? I know, Sam, what? I can't believe it either. She approached me to talk about a program that she wanted to do on end-of-life choices. And that fall, after the high holidays, she and I did a 4-week course that started with a text study and then the text that she brought, the knowledge, the wisdom that she brought. And as we worked on this program together, I had the chance to really get to know Karen. And in the 32 years that we were together, I found her to be not only inspirational, but a personal supporter. So grateful, which I had the chance to say when we honored her at her funeral, but how grateful I am to Karen for all the ways that she stepped up to support me personally, quietly, privately. It was wonderful to be with her at many programs, including her last great splash, the Israel-Palestinian Dialogue Program, Greg, that you guys did together. It was my great pleasure to be in your home, Marshall, and to see the beauty in that home. Boy, she was a classy gal, right? Your apartment, your home, always full of beautiful art. She was always, dressed just so. And how about the cooking? People didn't mention she was a great cook, which she was. I hope that in many ways and for many, many years we will honor Karen. We're so glad, Andrew, that you're here, and we wish Ian were here too. And you guys, Cole and Lane. Really, her memory is a blessing here in this congregation as people continue to do the good work. So many of you have taken on the mantle of the work that she cared passionately about. So thank you to everyone in that way. And thank you to Dr. Betsy Stone, who made the journey from Connecticut to be with us today and to impart on our community one of her many, many areas of great knowledge and wisdom, that of resilience. I had the chance to learn from you first during the pandemic when Betsy took a lot of space in supporting rabbis as we tried to support our congregations. I don't think I had had the chance to study with you, Betsy, before that time, because I was in school, like when you were in graduate school. So we missed that opportunity. But I jumped on a number of webinars that the CCAR provided to rabbis, as did Jeff and Stephanie Bernstein, who knew you, and our newest rabbi.
I did teach her.
You did teach Stephanie, right. To be able to be guided through the challenges of the pandemic by wise and caring teachers like Betsy Stone was a real gift. And I don't know whether the CCAR has just sort of eaten up all of your time once we saw what you could do for us. But I can say that, so thanks to Dr. Stone, who has provided clergy with small group, like short study opportunities, 4 sessions on a theme. I've been closed out of 2 so far, okay? I mean, I'm like 2 days behind everybody. You might be. But that is to say that I think many, many of our colleagues, of rabbinic colleagues in the country, have realized the great wisdom, the value that you've given to all of us, and I thank you on behalf of many, many clergy members who have really been enriched by what you bring to us and helped us so much. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Betsy Stone to our community. She is a psychologist who hails from Connecticut, and specifically from Yale University, where she both was an undergraduate and a graduate student getting her degree in psychology. From the breadth of her career as a clinical psychologist, she has dealt with so many slices of supporting the mental health community, whether it's teens or Gen Xers, parents, people with trauma. These are all really important, of course, themes, and she's touched them all. And I think it's correct to say that after retiring from clinical practice, sounds like a lot of your time has been filled by congregational engagement like this program here, and by rabbinic conversations on how we can serve the members of our congregations as best as possible. So there's more to say about Betsy Stone. This is a great opportunity to get to know her better. Her book, Refuah Shlema, Reflections on Healing and Growth. And I think you could Google that.
It's an Amazon.
It's an Amazon book, so there you are. And by the way, Amazon Smile Temple Road Shalom. There you can do that as well. We thank her for making the journey down and for the wisdom that she's going to impart upon us in the coming hours. Won't you join me in welcoming Dr. Stone? No, we need it. And by the way, if you need this.
Yes, and I've got more. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Rabbi says I'm too short.
Better with a step?
Better with the step, better without the step. Okay, I am of a sibship of 3 girls, and I am almost 5'3". My sisters are 5'8" and 5'9", so I actually think I'm really short, but I'm the height of the average American woman, so I feel
The step was made for 5'3" and below.
Okay.
I'm 5'1", and we did this whole math on it.
Okay. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Kaplan family, for everything that you supported in Karen. Because I know, as a person who does a lot of work in the community, none of us works by ourselves. And obviously, Karen had the support of her family and her community to make the kinds of differences in the world that she did. I hope that I honor her memory with you all today. A special thank you to Rabbi, to Ellen, and to Stephanie for shepherding me through this and making sure that that I knew what you wanted. But I will say to you that one of the things I believe about teaching in my kishkas is that you don't teach the material, you teach the people. And so, despite the fact that we have microphones set up and I'm going to stop at a couple of spots and say, ask me questions, if you have questions before then, and you have a brain like mine, you won't remember the questions until I ask you to share them with me. So raise your hand, shout out. Let's make sure that this is as useful to you as it can be. And frankly, this is the kind of physical setting in which you are used to being more passive rather than more active. So if you have the inclination to ask a question, I am not the rabbi. And you can stop me at any point, okay? So what we're going to do today, let me give you kind of an outline of how we're going to spend our time, and we'll see how much of it we get to. We're going to start with me talking to you about resilience and growth, and they're actually quite different. And then I want to talk some about post-traumatic growth. I'll stop at that point, ask you for questions, but also ask you to go and sit with somebody who you didn't drive with. That can be the criteria for how you pick the person you sit with. And I want to give you the opportunity to kind of identify how the ideas of post-traumatic growth might be relevant for you, might be things that you've learned, that you've experienced over the course, potentially of the last 3 years, but however long you want to use. Then Stephanie's going to do a little bit of work with you on vulnerability, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk truly about superpowers, about character strengths, which are the superpowers that we all bring into the world. So that's kind of the arc of what I hope we get to. We'll see what we get to, because again, the most important thing is that the time is useful for you. Questions? Wonderful. Okay. So when we start thinking about trauma, can I start with the assumption that all of us believe that the last 3 years might have had a little trauma in it? Okay, so I don't have to define trauma for you, and I don't have to convince you about trauma. It's really interesting. When I teach trauma to Israelis, they say, and using the American psychological vision of trauma, they say that's not trauma. And so one of the things I want to suggest to you that trauma is both truly personal and also culturally driven. That if you live in a community, if you live, for example, in Sderot, where there is an ongoing series of attacks from the West Bank, not the West Bank, sorry, from Gaza, yes, thank you. That's the part of my brain that is traumatized, right? You don't experience yourself as the pandemic isn't a trauma, because you've kind of integrated the idea that the world is disrupted all the time. But for us, in our lives of great privilege and of a sense of safety, which for some of us may have been maybe kind of feeling a little queasy right now in terms of increasing anti-Semitism. This experience of the last 3 years has been a kind of a classic experience of communal trauma. Communal trauma and individual trauma are actually quite different. Communal trauma changes the trajectory of history. That's actually how we understand the impact of communal trauma. So I could argue, for example, and I might argue, that but for the pandemic, Trump might still be president, or might be president again. Because, in fact, his handling of the pandemic and the trauma of the pandemic probably changed the trajectory of history. We also believe that individual trauma changes the trajectory of individual history. So that for each of us, we have had both a communal trauma and an individual trauma. For most of us, it has been a series of individual traumas. And one of the things that's important to know about trauma writ large is that the more trauma I've had in my life, the more sensitized I am to subsequent trauma. So, in fact, Cole and Lane are probably less sensitive to trauma than Andrew because of just years, right? So the more trauma I've had in my life, the more sensitized my brain is to responding to trauma. So when we think about trauma, this is a little tangent here. When we think about trauma, the study of trauma starts really after the First World War. I'm sure there were people who had trauma before the First World War, but the real study of trauma starts after the First World War, and it starts in Britain, where there is a significant increase in people who have what is called shell shock at that point, and are really disabled for the rest of their lives, soldiers who fought on battlefields. We don't see a lot of PTSD, what becomes PTSD, coming out of the Second World War, interestingly, and very little coming out of Korea. We saw tons coming out of Vietnam. There's reasons that we understand that have to do with how people went and how people returned and the way the communities welcomed people back. But it's not until the 70s and 80s that psychologists actually start thinking about trauma in a non-war way. So when we think about trauma, we're thinking about it in terms of soldiers. The feminist movement raises the idea that trauma can actually happen on an individual basis and not an institutional basis. And there is a huge debate in the psychological community about whether or not rape counts as a trauma, because it's not war. And so there's this shift in the way we think about trauma that comes out of the feminist movement. And there's a lot of research on trauma and PTSD, and I'm not going to talk to you about that. What happens then in the late 1980s, early 1990s, is that researchers start looking at people who come through trauma and have positive outcomes from it. And this is called post-traumatic growth. So we start looking at the impact of traumatic experiences that actually change our lives for the better. Not that we would choose traumatic experiences, because nobody would, but that the trajectory of our lives changes in positive ways, and which I can say to myself, I'm not glad this happened, but I learned important things from it. So we may see that in a response to illness, we may see that in a response to violence. We'll talk about the kind of different kinds of growth in just a minute. But it's important for us to understand that actually in psychological language, growth and resilience are quite different. We tend to use the words interchangeably. They're not interchangeable. So I'm going to use the words in the following way. I think of resilience as being kind of bounce back, as though I am a rubber band that gets stretched and returns to what it was before. Not a rubber band that is stressed, but a rubber band that is just stretched and returns. That what resilience really is the ability to return to a previous state. Had we had that initial 2 weeks of lockdown that remember they told us we were going to be in lockdown for 2 weeks, and we said, how will I survive that? We would be resilient. We wouldn't learn anything from it. We wouldn't have learned anything from it. That is a response to difficulty or even to trauma that doesn't really change me, changes me temporarily. So that's what I would call resilience. When we talk about going back to normal, this is a phrase that for me is like fingernails on a chalkboard. I don't think it's possible. I am not the person I would have been today, but for this pandemic. When we talk about going back to normal, we're thinking about resilience. We're not thinking about growth. Growth is actually quite different. Growth is transformation. It is almost always painful. It is almost always uncomfortable. And it requires that growth requires that my worldview changes. So let me pause here for a minute and ask you, who's brave, can you think of a way in which your worldview has changed since the beginning of the pandemic? She wins the Bravery Award.
No, it's so easy. I think.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, it's super easy. I mean, everyone has had to be so much more flexible, right? That's it. Period. End of story. You don't know who's going to be ill the next day, what's going to be happening, something's going to be canceled. That was a very easy question.
So we've had to be adaptable in ways that we might not have had to be adaptable before. Absolutely. All right. Now I want a harder answer to that question. Go ahead, Rabbi. You can be very loud, I bet.
Well, I could be. I have a very outdoor voice. But I really, in terms of worldview, when we think about the fact that the variants let's think about China right now. New variants are emerging because of a decision that that country made about the way they handled the disease and the way they handled vaccines. It is another reminder that there are really no borders in the world, that we are so all one, that we have a responsibility to every member of humanity on this earth, and every person all the way over there in China is going to impact us. And that really was a boom in my mind with the ideas of sort of how COVID spread and changed, and a real deeper sense of responsibility to others in a way that I didn't have before.
Wonderful, wonderful. I hope you all heard that. There's a mic there, there's a mic here. Come on, if you want to get up, get up. If you don't have to. Sam, if you want to just yell, I'll repeat it.
Use the mic because of the recording.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, thank you.
I think what might be different is that I think everybody's had to face the possible loss of someone they love.
Yep.
In ways that it never happened before, that the fragility of life. We've lost at least one person during this that life shouldn't have been lost in our view. Mm-hmm. It goes to a bigger view I have. I think since the end of World War II that we have lived in this country a huge life of privilege.
Yep.
And that what we refer to as trauma in some ways is a nice kind of life, trauma. Missed school one day, so to speak. I'm not oversimplifying it. And that this has brought a deeper level, potentially, certainly not like the world wars or the like, but I think the fragility of life, and when somebody is sick or has it and you're never sure for sure that they'll recover, is a different level of trauma than many of us have been used to over time.
Lovely, lovely. So what Sam is pointing out is two things here, and I think they're both important. One is we're not immune to life and death. And the other is, I think for many of us, we didn't really understand how privileged we were. And now we really have a different understanding of both how privileged we are and what that means for other people and their relationships with us. So these two, and then we're going to keep going. Go ahead.
So I think that this is somewhat akin to the theme that others have been speaking about, but with our world getting smaller with lockdown, speaking personally, maybe not for others, but I think it's probably more general, become a lot more introspective.
Yes.
A lot more thinking about the meaning of my life, what my world is about, and all of that sort of thing.
Which is, that introspection can actually be a response to the knowledge of privilege. Mm-hmm. And I think for many of us, after George Floyd's murder, there was a real, what am I doing in the world and what am I getting away with kind of thing. I think there's that. There's also, obviously, I speak as also a gray-haired person. There's introspection that is kind of a natural part of what we call in my field encore adulthood, which is the period of time. Historically, what you were supposed to do was you were supposed to leave work, get a gold watch, have a year and die. And we don't do that anymore. And that kind of 30-year chunk, which for many of us is actually longer than our working years, is called encore adulthood. And one of the things that happens in encore adulthood is that I start thinking about, what have I done and what do I leave?
You must have noticed my gray hair.
I had noticed that you had a few gray hairs. Thank you. Susan, go ahead, and then we're going to talk about arenas of post-traumatic growth.
I don't want to get political, but I feel like
You're about to.
something is, well, I don't think this can be, you can't overlook this.
because it certainly traumatized me, was the unwillingness of many Americans to acknowledge facts.
Yeah.
And acknowledge medical science. I didn't know that population existed to the extent that it did, and I always sort of, and maybe it was just me, I thought they were sort of fringe,
Yeah.
and how they came to impact all of our lives, and I have found that incredibly bewildering and upsetting.
And in some sense, Susan, what you're describing, and I think what Sam is describing and what my gray-haired friend is describing, is this sense that I live in a world that I thought was X, and I just discovered it's not X. Yeah. Now, it may have some X overlaps, but it's not X. And privilege allows us not to experience that. That's actually one of the impacts of privilege, is that I can pretend that this is all I have to see. And I think for people with much less privilege, that awareness probably existed before in ways that it doesn't for us. Okay, so psychology, I am already behind on time. Okay, this is inevitable. So psychologists looked at these arenas of post-traumatic growth, and they came up with 6 what are described as silos. Now, I'm using the word silos with a real tongue-in-cheek because I can't see them as silos. They don't make sense to me as silos. So while I'm going to describe them to you as silos, I don't quite know what that means around these kinds of arenas of post-traumatic growth. But what I want you to do as I describe these to you is I want you to think about, I'll give you examples of them, but I want you to think about which of these you're experiencing or people around you are experiencing. Because what I hope to do if I talk really fast is to give you the opportunity to share with each other which of these silos you're seeing in yourself. Okay? So 6 silos in no particular order, and you don't get an A at this. They don't give A's at life, they don't give A's at silos, and so you don't get to do all 6 of them, and you don't get to, if you're lucky, you never stop working on these, okay? So arenas of post-traumatic growth. Here, the first one, again, no particular order, is an awareness of what I'm good at, an awareness of personal strengths. So I learned, for example, I don't think this is a profound personal strength, I learned, for example, that I could teach over Zoom. It's not something I would have thought I could do, but it's something that I learned I could do because I did it. And so that we begin to become aware of things that we can do that we didn't actually know we could do or that we had never tried. Michelle Obama learned how to knit in the pandemic. I am a knitter, and so to me that is an awareness of personal strength. But I am not much of a cook, and so for when you talk about Karen's cooking, that doesn't fit in my category of personal strength. I'm sure it was for her. So we begin to see a new understanding of what I'm good at. One of the things, part of the challenge of this arena, this post-traumatic growth silo, is that as I begin to understand what I'm good at, I also should, and as a partner to that, be saying to myself, and these are things I don't care about. These are things that matter to me and I'm good at. These are things I don't care about and I'm not going to work on. Most of us did not do that. We just kept loading our plates with more rather than saying, I'm going to add this to my plate and I'm going to take that off. And this is one of the things that we're actually seeing a great deal in clergy of all faiths right now, that clergy worked, instead of 24/7, they worked 36/8. They worked way too hard and are really, I don't know if this is true for you, but are struggling with what can I give up because I took too much on and I can't maintain this. So that's the first arena. The second arena is a reprioritization of values, new possibilities. What matters to me? One of the, you're about to see how I can't keep these things siloed. One of the things that we saw early in vaccines was that while historically most people got on airplanes in the United States for professional reasons, when we were first vaccinated, the vast majority of people who got on airplanes went to see family and friends. That's an example of reprioritization of values, right? I realized, bless you, that the people I wanted to see the most in the whole world were my in-laws, who are now 93 and 94 years old. And so while I might have said pre-pandemic, I'll go see them if it's convenient, I really desperately missed them. And the idea that they and we had survived the pandemic, they were where I wanted to be. That's a real reprioritization of values, okay? Here's where it gets mushy with the next one. The third arena is in our relationships with others. That does sound like it kind of gets mushy there, doesn't it? What we saw in the pandemic early on, and this was actually international, was a significant increase in the divorce rate. That is people who said to themselves, I'm locked down with you, and that's not where I want to be. We also see in this arena, in this silo of post-traumatic growth, an increase in compassion and altruism and kindness. I want to parse those three for you. They're actually very different from a psychological point of view. So compassion is, I feel badly for you. I walk down the street in Manhattan, I see a homeless person, and I say to myself, oh, that's really awful. That's compassion. That's all it is. Altruism, kindness is, I walk down the street in New York. I don't have to say that's really awful, but I have a granola bar in my purse, and I pull it out, and I say, would you like a granola bar? That's kindness. I can do that out of a sense of compassion. I can do that because I think the granola bar is getting old. It doesn't really matter what my motivation is when I'm being kind. And we tend to think that motivation around kindness is critically important. It's not from a psychological point of view. Altruism, the third one of these, is I walk down the street in New York, I see that same homeless person, and I say to myself, there should not be homeless people in the United States. And I neither feel badly nor give that person my kind of cruddy granola bar, but I say to myself, there should not be homelessness in the United States, there should not be hunger, and I work in an organization that addresses issues of food insecurity. That's altruism. So these three can exist completely separately from each other, and we see changes in all three of them: compassion, kindness, and altruism as a result of trauma. That makes sense? Okay. So the other thing we also saw in our relationships with other people was we saw people shedding relationships that they didn't care about. Think about the people that you have truly remained in contact with, the people that you've called, the people that you Zoomed with early on. Those are the people that you let go are a very different beast than the people you held on to. And one of the things we see in the silo that we call relationships with others is shedding irrelevant relationships. We also see people increasing their acts of social support. Judy and Sheldon Katz used to be members of my synagogue in Connecticut, and there was a person in our synagogue who delivered food to them for how long? Okay, who basically, his job was to go to the grocery store for them. That's being social support. And we see increases in that. Okay, so that's three. I've given you an awareness of personal strength, new possibilities, reprioritization of values, and relationships with others. I'm going to pause here and ask you what you think of those three. What do you think the Parkland kids did? The Parkland kids. Altruism, absolutely. And a reprioritization of values, right? They took their traumatic experience, I don't think anybody can argue that that was a traumatic experience, and they started March for Our Lives. And they changed the dialogue. They didn't change it enough, but they changed the dialogue. Okay. Fourth arena of post-traumatic growth is in the appreciation of life. I think for many of us, this was one of the ones that we experienced over and over and over again. I'm so lucky. Whether it's I'm so lucky no one died, or I'm so lucky the crocuses still bloom, although not now. An awareness of being blessed. The language of blessing can actually be really challenging for people. And so if that language isn't the right language for you, just the awareness of luck, that my life is good and probably good enough. Brene Brown, who I think is a modern day prophet in many ways, says that the opposite of failure is enough. It's not success, it's enough. And that's probably the only thing she says that is permanently in my brain, but I have to keep remembering that. Fifth arena, this one I love to talk about because it's the one I know about which I can say never happens for me, which is post-traumatic growth that is in the arena of creativity. Picasso paints Guernica, one of his most amazing pieces of art, after a battle in the Spanish Civil War, because he takes experiences and transforms them into something creative. I think artists, whether they are visual artists or auditory artists or poets or writers, trauma is actually often the basis of what they offer to us, the gifts that they give to us, and that many of us experience trauma through the lens, in whatever part of the body you want to talk about it, through the lens of the work of artists who are inspired often by trauma. And the last arena of post-traumatic growth is in spirituality. Now, when I was teaching at HUC, and I'm not teaching there right now, at Hebrew Union College, one of the classes I taught was a class that was on spirituality over the lifespan. How does spirituality change over the lifespan? And I started the class by asking my students who were rabbinic, cantorial, and education students, so the people who are going to lead the next generation, I asked them to write down a spiritual experience. And I confess to you, I thought that all of their spiritual experiences were going to be similar to mine. I have two sets of very spiritual places that I experience as being very spiritual. One is nature, whether it's that crocus blooming or the leaves falling or whatever. And the other is sleeping children, not awake children, but sleeping children. And so I thought everybody's experience of spirituality was going to be the same as mine. And I was 100% wrong. And we then spent the rest of the semester trying to figure out what spirituality was. I believe we never succeeded. But one person said a Mets game was a spiritual experience. This would not do it for me. Another person said when she understood string theory, I don't even know what understanding string theory means. And so when we think about spiritual experiences, they are personal, they are idiosyncratic. And what we see, and they are not for literally every person in this class that I was teaching, all in seminary, not a one of them talked about, when I asked about spirituality, not a one of them talked about a religious experience. Nothing happened in shul, nothing that happened in Israel, nothing that happened at the wall, nothing that happened in the kind of prescriptive religious behaviors that we engage in. that all their spiritual experiences were much more personal and interestingly less passive. So when I talk about spiritual change and development, which is this sixth silo, I'm not talking about the moment when your stomach is growling at 11 o'clock on Yom Kippur. I'm talking about something that is actually, for most of us, much more private, much more personal, and much less translatable to other people. So here's our 6 arenas of post-traumatic growth. I'm going to go over them for you one more time, but I want to say one more thing before I give you an assignment here, which is that these are all ways in which human beings engage in meaning making. Now, I think that meaning making is actually the thing that distinguishes us from other mammals. Now, I can't prove that because I don't know what other mammals think, but that human beings are driven to make meaning out of things. We want to understand not only why it happened, but what impact it has on me. That's why you're all here, is because you're all people, unless you're just here for Karen's family, which is also meaning making. It's why we think about these big questions of what is trauma and how does it impact us. It's because we're meaning making creatures. And meaning making is really a way in which I see my future differently than I saw my past. I understand how I fit in the world in a different way. Whether the meaning making is around questions of privilege or whether the meaning making is around questions of altruism, what should I do next? Meaning making is a way that I understand my relationship to the world in both a personal and a communal way. So here's your assignment. I want you to, if you're willing, to find somebody you didn't drive here with, and to spend the next 7 to 10 minutes, depending on how much talking is happening, thinking about, with that person, thinking about the kinds of post-traumatic growth you've seen in yourself or the people around you. The reason I want you to do this is not because I want a break, but because I actually think that all this stuff is up here, it's just intellectual. It doesn't do you any good until it becomes personal. And so while I don't believe in trickle-down economics, I do believe in trickle-down psychology. And so I want you to take what you've just learned and try to apply it to yourself in conversation with someone else. Questions for me about that assignment first. Okay, questions for me about the arenas of post-traumatic growth, which I can't write down for you, but I will be happy to repeat for you. Repeat, okay. Here they go. Awareness of personal strength. New understanding of what I'm good at. New possibilities, a reprioritization of my values. Relationships with other people. Compassion, altruism, kindness, support. Appreciation of life. That's where I use the word blessing and said, if you don't like that word, don't use it. Creativity and spiritual change and development. Okay, so you are now all supposed to stand up if you're able and find somebody you didn't drive here with. Do you need more time? Okay, you get 2 more minutes. You to be quiet. You were quiet immediately. I'll pause for a moment. One of the things that we talked about, Ellen and Stephanie and I, when we originally began to imagine this afternoon, was that it's really it's a wonderful exercise to learn new things, but it is much more important to use them, which is what hopefully you just did. Stephanie has put together a wonderful packet of activities and materials for you to use both today and in follow-up with this kind of content. So she's going to give you a little bit of an overview of that, and then I'm going to take you back.
So if you're 5'3" and have to stand on this, I might need 2. And it moves. It moves, I'm 5'1". Okay. So thank you, Betsy. And Betsy actually asked for me to go a little quickly, which is great news because I speak fast anyway. So I will try and find that balance of fast and slow. So while this afternoon is going to be filled with Betsy's expertise and wisdom on fostering resilience, both Betsy and I are going to ask you to engage in deep thinking and hopefully sharing, which she just did. Inevitably, this requires some level of vulnerability. The good news, vulnerability is one of our superpowers. It's a strength and part of developing what I like to call the resilient mindset. Embracing vulnerability as a strength is the core of the process. Many people have been taught to be strong, to endure, to power through difficult times. We're not necessarily taught to talk about our emotions, or show that we might be uncertain about how to move forward. How often have you pretended that you were okay and you had all things under control? Being vulnerable takes courage. Courage to open yourself to experiences and possibly new emotions, even difficult ones. Being vulnerable asks you to sit with discomfort. But also, being vulnerable, as Brené Brown mentions, is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, empathy, and creativity. So I could spend an entire afternoon talking about all of those and how they're all necessary on the road to resilience. But Betsy's going to take care of most of them, I believe. I will, however, focus for just a minute on the concept of courage. I happen to be a big fan of Rollo Mays, for those who don't know, an important psychological thinker and philosopher. And part of May's work focuses on the role of courage and how courage is necessary to make being and becoming human possible. Considering May's work, I posed the question that May asks of his followers. Shall we, as we feel our foundation shaking, withdraw in anxiety or panic? Or shall we seize the courage necessary to move ahead despite despair? May also suggests there is a curious paradox about this concept of courage. We must be fully committed, but at the same time, we must be aware that we might be fully wrong. So I'm going to invite you to find the courage to be vulnerable and see where this takes you. While this brief activity, I'm going to keep it short, is an internal process in nature, I invite you to turn towards your neighbor and share after you've taken a few minutes to think about the questions I pose. I call this exercise Doorways, and it's just a brief introduction to some of the activities that we will do in the breakout session after. So take a moment and think back to when a door closed, such as a missed opportunity, a change in circumstance, or even a relationship ending. Think about what happened after this door closed. What would have never happened if this first door had remained open? So take a minute and think about that. I'll read that again. Think back to when a door closed, such as a missed opportunity, a change in circumstance, or even a relationship ending. Now think about what happened after this door closed. What would have never happened if this first door had remained open? So if you feel that you can be courageous enough to turn to your neighbor and share with them, the door that closed on me was, and the new door that opened for me was. So take a minute and turn towards someone and have...
Maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah, it's just this certain it's like, it's not a sense.
It looks like everyone has a lot to share, and I appreciate everyone having the courage to be vulnerable with themselves and one another. I'm going to ask for your attention up here so Betsy can finish up. Okay, so is everyone, okay, and let me just finish one thing. So if I can just have your attention and we can follow up with this conversation after, it would be great. So now that you had the moment, when shared, do we land in love, belonging, creativity, and empathy? When we have that, what do we have? The beginning of a resilient mind. Harness the courage to the courage to lean in and be open, of acceptance, of sorrow, distress, heartbreak, you name it. This is when the growth occurs. I will see all of those who registered after this session if you're interested in diving more into things that foster resilience and exercises. So thank you.
So Stephanie is going to pass out, and maybe some people will help her, pens and pieces of paper. I think that the activities that you're going to be doing with Stephanie later are really incredibly important to using this stuff, this kind of information, and in an intentional way. And so I want to suggest to you it could be really helpful to you. Here's tangent number 12. There's really interesting research. It's old research, and so I don't know how it applies to millennials. There's papers coming and pens coming, and everybody needs one of each. If you have a pen in your purse or your wallet or wherever, you don't need to take one. There's really interesting research that says that when women and children talk about how we feel, that we get two pretty consistent responses. One response is that we're told that we're wrong. That's actually not how you feel. And the other is that I can solve it for you. I want to suggest to you that neither of those responses is terribly helpful, and that all of us have had those experiences. So if you and I are standing at the foot of a roller coaster and I say to you, I'm scared, and you say there's nothing to be scared of, I actually am just as scared, I just don't trust you anymore. And if you tell me what to do, I'm just as scared, I don't trust you anymore, and I think that you're judging me. And so I want to suggest to you that when you're in these kinds of dialogues about things that make me feel vulnerable, the worst thing we do is tell other people either what's wrong with what they feel or what they should do. And those are responses which we engage in because they make us feel better, not because they make the other person feel better. So that if I say to you, there's nothing to be scared of, what I've actually said to you is, shut up. If that's my intention, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's rarely my intention. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now, and this is a real shift from what we've done in the first hour, is we're going to talk about identity and character. And what you have on these sheets in front of you is a list of character strengths. Please ignore the Hebrew. Don't worry about the Hebrew. The Hebrews are not, in many places, the Hebrew is not a great translation of the English. But what I want you to do as I'm talking to you right now about the difference between character and identity is to look over these pieces of paper and tell me what words don't make sense to you. Because I have never yet done this where everybody understood the words, including me. So the difference between, you tend to use the words character and identity interchangeably. Thank you, Stephanie. I just want one. We tend to use those words interchangeably as though they are the same thing. They're actually very different. Identity is much more situationally driven. I am a student when I'm in school. I am a parent when I am with my children. I don't actually feel much, my kids are now adults and out of the house. I don't really feel like a parent much of the time when I'm not interacting with them. Although that's clearly part of my identity. Identity is situationally driven. It exists in hierarchy, so that there are parts of my identity that are more important to me and parts of my identity that are less important to me. So right now, the part of my identity that is a parent or a reader is not particularly, or a knitter is not particularly relevant, right? It may be that the part of my identity that is a Jew is relevant. And to the extent to which I've done some programming for a group of Lutheran ministers, and I don't use Yiddish, right? Duh. Because they don't understand that language, that means that my identity, in some sense, the way in which I present myself to the world changes. That's identity. So the way you behave when you're at home by yourself is different than the way you behave when you're walking into shul on Yom Kippur morning. Duh. Identity is a moving part of who we are. Character, interestingly, doesn't seem to be that. Character seems to be much more fixed. And we actually know that there are parts of the human genome where parts of our character live. Like we've identified a space on the human genome that is associated with generosity. And we also know that some of these character traits, a lot of character traits, are actually not learned but innate. So here's a fascinating piece of research. Psychologists looked at children, biological offspring of parents who were Democrats and were adopted into Republican households. Bless you, bless you, bless you. And biological children who were the biological offspring of, I did Dems into Republican, Republicans into Dem households. Right? So your biology is one political party, and your nurture, so that's nature, and your nurture is a different political party. And what we found was that people vote nature. They don't vote nurture. Which I think is just fascinating and mind-boggling. Because I think a lot of this stuff is stuff I learned growing up. That my values came from where I was raised. It appears that some of our values are simply hardwired. I just think that's fascinating. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this periodic table, which is made by a guy who works at the Foundation for Jewish Camp. Ignore the thing on the far right bottom that says majesty. It's irrelevant. I don't even think he knows what it means. But what I'd like you to do is to kind of look over this and tell me what words you don't understand or that don't make sense for you. These are character strengths. And I know that there are people who don't understand, that some of these don't make sense. What is amenability? I think of that as kind of going along to get along, right? You say to me you want Chinese food, and I think, oh my God, I hate Chinese food. Sure, that'd be fine. Okay? Other ones on here that are confusing, perturbing. Zest and zeal are together, aren't they? Yeah, I think that's just wild enthusiasm. Right? Explain zest and zeal? I think that is just approaching the world with enthusiasm, right? So the person who says, oh boy, about everything. Not me. Other things. Piety. Piety is, from my point of view, is religious behavior for the sake of religious behavior. So there is a law in Torah text that says that you can't mix wool and linen in your clothes. There's no explanation given for it. And piety would say, okay, there's a piece of Torah that says I can't mix wool and linen. I just don't do it. As opposed to, why? Right? Great. Yeah, appreciation of opposition is tolerance for other people's point of view and probably also an engagement with the other person's point of view, right? Which is one of the things that we've really seen a huge decrease in over the last, you count how many years it works for you, that we have gotten to the point where we don't actually discuss things with other people that make them or us uncomfortable. I don't agree with you, let's talk about something else. So innate intolerance, yes, it is respect. It is respect. It has to at least appear that way to the other person, even if in my head I'm thinking, oh my God. Go ahead. I'm sorry? Inner beauty. So, I think that inner beauty is simply, is those people, Karen sounds like she was this kind of person. People who just bring goodness into the world. Reverence and awe are the same, and that is what happens to me when the crocus comes up. Okay, for me that's a spiritual experience. It might not be for you. Other questions? Say it again.
Foresight and prediction.
Foresight is the ability to anticipate. When my husband and I are traveling, he assumes that everything he needs to bring is in his suitcase. Thank God we live in a world where there is a CVS everywhere. I, on the other hand, have packed 3 days ahead of time, and I don't pack for him. Say it again. Righteousness is upstandingness. It's I don't think it's like piety where you just follow the rules. I think it's when there's some kind of inherent internal coherence to the rules. But
I could talk.
Okay, what? You want to talk about righteousness? Go ahead, Rabbi. Here we've got righteousness, the expert on righteousness.
Just a little comment on these two differences. Piety, indeed, is directly in the... I'm looking at the Hebrew now.
Yeah, did I
I'm not
say
looking
not
at the English.
to look at the Hebrew?
Sorry, I don't follow the rules sometimes. Have you ever seen me not... Okay. Piety, indeed, in this Hebrew word, has to do with mitzvot, commandments, halacha, as you so aptly said. Whereas tzedek is a word, by the way, that exists in the active verb group, okay? So tzedek is that which we do, those righteous deeds. By the way, it is in the PL, it has a dagation, that means it's active, okay? So pious, I'm going to wear my talis, I'll not wear my woolen linen and all this, but tzedek might be what I do going to that march or pushing forward for some kind of social change, as well as righteous deeds that are uniquely Jewish and which hold within them the values. But to get the qualification of righteousness in Judaism, you have to act.
Which implies to me that compassion isn't righteousness.
Correct. So righteousness in Judaism, you can't... We just talked about this in Torah study. Anyone remember? Just 2 weeks ago. Righteousness, you cannot sit at home, pay your taxes, light your Shabbat candles, but never act in the world. You don't get the righteousness quality.
Badge.
Right. Okay?
Right. It doesn't go on your sash.
Right. Nope.
Okay.
So that helps. That's just from a Jewish... Sorry, I couldn't resist.
That's your job. Wait, Rabbi. There's a question.
The righteous among the nations.
Right, and those are people who acted to save Jews. Right? So they acted. Okay, last definition.
Well, it's a question. I see integrity, which I've always viewed as living your values, but does it mean living the right values?
Oh, is integrity living the right values or just living values?
No judgment on that.
What? What'd you say?
Sam, integrity is also the equilibrium of your values with your actions and your statements. So I can't judge. You can be a person of integrity and not be the values that I share, right? That's it, right?
What? These are not values. These are character strengths. Character strengths are for most of us dictate the way we live our values. Our values come out of our character strengths. So integrity is, from this point of view, integrity is I tell you the truth as I understand it. I live the truth as I understand it. It doesn't necessarily mean it is the truth. Oh my God, are there debatable facts? Oh, just alternative ones. The opposite would be hypocrisy or simply lying. Okay, now I have a job for you. I'm going to suggest to you that it would be helpful to you. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I'm going to tell you that I want you to mark 5 of these for each one of these series of questions. If you don't have a pen now, it's the time to put your hand up in the air. Okay, so what I want you to do, I'm going to bring them to you, is I want you to mark, thank you very much. I want you to mark with a star the 5 of these that are most important to you. Lane needs one in the front row too. You have to pick 5. You don't get to pick more than 5. You don't get to pick less than 5. The 5 that are the most important to you. Yes.
So should it be the 5 that we value in ourselves and that we value in other people?
In yourself. The 5 that are most important to me. So, for example, one of the things I think is really interesting about playing with this is that for many of us, our character strengths are not the same as our partners, which is, I think, is an interesting thing. Though my husband doesn't pack everything he needs, for him, order is very high. For me, order is very low. I don't really care that much about order. He cares a lot about order. So what I want you to do is to come up with the 5 that are most important for you personally. Anybody else need a pen? Lane, do you still need one? Okay. And I would put a star at the top with most important next to it. Okay, you've done 5 that are the most important to you. Now you get to do the 5 that you don't care about. The 5 that are least important to you, I would put order in that for me. What symbol shall we do for this? A negative sign. An X? An X. Okay, an X. The 5 that are least important to you. Don't help your partner. Sam Simon. Hush. I see people helping each other. Don't help each other. Are you still writing? Anybody still writing? Okay. I actually think in many ways that the 5 that are least important to me is much more important for me to recognize than the 5 that are most. That because we are all so ambitious about being perfect, that I think being able to say, I don't care about this, is a huge gift to give ourselves. Okay. You can pick either the family you come from or the family you created or your group of friends for this next one. It's family in the kind of largest sense of the word. The 5 that matter the most in the way your family lives, which may not have anything to do with the 5 that either of the other 2 sets of 5 you've come up with. Matters the most in the way your family lives. Does that make sense? Yes, go ahead. Could be family of origin, could be family of creation, could be family of friends. I don't really care how you use the word family. What I'm really looking at is the collection of people who have the deepest influence on you, or who you pick to think about. Oh, what sign? Circle. Okay. What they have. You still scribbling? Okay. This is going to be the last one. I always struggle with what I want to do with this one because I always feel like this question, the question I'm about to ask you, is inherently judgmental, which is not my intention, but what I'm going to ask, I'm asking it so that you can think about how you think about yourself, not because it matters one whit to anybody else. Okay? The 5 that are most important for being a good person. A heart. You only get 5. You must pick 5. Oh, they can totally overlap. The 5 that are most important for being a good person. 5. You only get 5. Andrew, don't help her. Okay. If you were all here with partners, one of the questions I would be asking you is the 5 you see in your partner. And that is a question that I think is an interesting question about the use of character strengths. In many ways, I'm talking as though you're done, and so I'm just going to presume that you can still work and listen at the same time. In many ways, these character strengths, the ones that you put a star next to, the ones that matter the most to me, those are your superpowers. Those character strengths that you put a star next to, the top 5, those are your superpowers. What we tend to think of when we think about our character strengths is the things we're lousy at. My desk is a mess. Okay. And we tend to judge ourselves in terms of the things we do poorly more than we judge ourselves in terms of the things we do well. So there is a gift in saying to myself, I don't care about those things. These things matter to me. There's a good gift in saying to myself, this is what a good person, a good me, does. And to the extent that I can focus on those strengths, those aspects of my character that are my innate strengths, those are the things which I can grow and bring to the world. We know, for example, though there hasn't been this research done on all the character strengths by a long shot, we know, for example, that people who keep gratitude journals get better at gratitude. What is a gratitude journal? It's a piece of paper, or it's actually much more effective to write things with your hand than it is to write things with your fingers, just typing. If I at the end of every day tell myself what I am grateful for that happened over the course of the day, my ability to experience gratitude will grow over time. That when I focus on the things that I am good at, they expand. When I focus on the things that I am bad at, I focus on the things that I am bad at. And I don't actually get a lot of benefit from that. And because we are so likely to judge ourselves against, I should get an A at all of this, we tend not to notice the gifts I actually bring to the world. The gifts you bring to the world are your strengths. They are the forms of post-traumatic growth that you've experienced over the course of the last year and which you will continue to experience, because this isn't over. Trauma doesn't end. One of the things we understand about trauma is that it is actually stored in a part of our brain that doesn't have language. And so I don't actually get to the point where the trauma's gone. Just like with grief, my relationship to the trauma and the grief change. When I'm grieving initially, grief is in charge of me. Over time, I am in charge of grief, but it pops up like a whack-a-mole. That is equally true of trauma. So if you are here with a partner or a friend and they look at what you've marked, don't let them tell you what's wrong with it, because it's yours. But what I want to suggest to you is that everything about what you have marked, the things that you think of as being what makes a good person, and hopefully some of that overlaps with what you think matters to you, those are the drivers. Those are the things that we should all hold on to. The magical strengths that we have are the places in which I see myself as skilled and capable and strong. Not in the places where I say I'm not any good at this. So I'm getting this from Ellen. I knew that was coming. So what I want to do right now is I want to pause and ask you for questions or comments on any of the stuff we've talked about, and to hear what you have to say about character and post-traumatic growth and trauma and anything that I can be helpful with right now. So who's the person with courage? Oh, it was you. Questions, comments, ideas, arguments. I love arguments. Go ahead. Really loud, please. Hey, come on, you're getting your steps in.
The comment that you made about that people tend to not accentuate their strengths as much as they do their weaknesses. You think that that is a symbol of Jewish people in general?
So the question is the focus on what I do poorly a Jewish dance? I don't think so. I do think that there are generational impacts that we are raising that a lot of us are raising our children to think that they should be able to do anything and everything, and that does focus us on the things I don't do well. I wonder if it's an American thing. I think it is an American thing. I think it may be a manifestation of privilege, that I'm blessed, so I should be able to do everything. I don't want to think it's that we're better at suffering in this particular way, but we might be. I hadn't thought about that. Go to timeout. Go ahead.
Hi, I feel like I'm missing part of what your co-presenter, and I'm sorry, names go right over my head, presented in terms of developing resilience. Probably because I don't retain things orally very well. I need to write things down, which is not what I have right now. So I wonder if you could, I don't know, is there a way to kind of recap what you were trying to say?
Sure. So one of the pieces that I was really focusing on is the role of vulnerability and resiliency. And part of that is being able to sit with the discomfort by opening to new experiences and new emotions. And also with that comes with the sharing. Because when we share, when we're vulnerable and we're open, and we have that way of presenting in the world and then connecting with others and sharing, we then see that we're not alone. And we are all human. And we all struggle. Some of us suffer. But we have the ability to choose, again, depending upon the trauma or depending upon the situation that happened, and related to timing too, but we have the ability to choose to engage in activities that help foster a resilient mindset. And part of that, like I said earlier, comes with vulnerability, being open to yourself, to allow yourself to feel what's in there, and then to also be able to connect with others to see that you're not alone in this journey of becoming resilient or post-traumatic growth. So does that answer your question? Okay. And so what we're going to do after this is I will do some more activities. Even Betsy mentioned the practice of gratitude. I have different exercises if you want to learn about practices that engage the mind, they don't necessarily make you resilient, but it's a practice towards establishing a resilient mindset.
Okay, Ramon, we'll take your question and then we do need to move on, okay? Then we're going to feed you.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation you gave on the arenas. And I was thinking, we just finished reading the story of Jacob and climbing the ladders, through higher levels of resilience and forgiveness. But I want to really appreciate what you have presented to us. And maybe we could include in the resilience that transformational and creative critical thinking, that adaptability. And since we have so much interdependence in the world, Jewish values teaches us to climb that ladder and to present a strategy for survival and resilience.
It's a really interesting and important point. What you're raising is the idea that cultures and peoples can also be resilient and can also grow. And I don't think there's any question about that. We also understand that to be true about institutions. And so how does RODF move forward, for example, into the next stage of growth? And that's partly based on what's foundational, what are the strengths that are foundational of the institution. It's also based on what are the external pressures. And so when we're thinking about all of these concepts, they apply to individuals, they apply to groups, they apply to institutions, they apply to cultures. And so maybe that answer is part of the answer to, is this a Jewish dance? We are all, we're influenced by all of that stuff. And none of it is stagnant. And let's just go back to what was, is a wish for something that's stagnant. I just don't think human beings are built that way. I just don't. All right, thank you so much. Carol's turn.
Well, I want to continue with the words of thanks to our wonderful speakers, Amy for helping to introduce us, Amy and Tina both, to Karen and the tribute that they both gave to her, to Betsy and to Stephanie, both for your insights, your inspirational talk, and hopefully most of you found their remarks to be helpful. I also want to acknowledge and thank the many people who helped us today to make this program work, the volunteers within our own adult education committee who welcomed you, have set out the food, and taken care of all the logistics, and that would be Lisa Downing, Ken Williams, Larry Chalmers, Maxine Olson, Linda Marshall, our leader, Cantor Leader. And if I missed somebody, I apologize. Thank you to the TRS building staff for helping to organize the building so we could conduct this program. Thanks to all of you for coming out, as Ellen said, instead of choosing football or some other activity today. Please check your email tonight or tomorrow. We do have a questionnaire that we are sending out to people who registered for today's program to get your feedback. It's really important to us, and we wish that you would please complete that survey within the next few days. Logistically, when you exit the sanctuary to your right, you will see that there are tables set up with refreshments. It's light refreshments, they're all packaged. We wanted to protect everybody's safety. And we ask that you maintain some social distancing as you pick up your refreshments. If you wish to talk to people, just spread out. And for those of you who want to learn more, in the social hall in about 20-25 minutes, Stephanie Bloom will be starting her session on fostering individual resilience, which is really taking everything that we've talked about today and applying it to yourself and looking for ways in which you are resilient or could become more resilient and how that might be achieved. We think it's a great opportunity, and we hope many of you will take advantage of it. And finally, because we have to plug our own programs, please consider our next program, which is actually starting on Thursday night and continues for the following 2 Thursdays. So it's a 3 Thursday night Beit Midrash on Zoom. You don't have to come to the temple. It's in the comfort of your own home. The title is Jewish Nostalgia as Religious Practice. And Professor Rachel B. Gross is our speaker. She's coming to us from California, so you can understand why this is on Zoom. Details about that program can be found on the TRS calendar, as well as on the adult education preview, which we were handing out at the beginning of the session, and there probably are more copies outside still for you to review if you haven't picked one up already. And thanks again, everybody, for coming. We hope this has been a meaningful day for you, and we really appreciate your support of everything that we are doing here and that everybody else at TRS is doing. And thank you to the Caring Committee for all of their help as well.